Hello, welcome to the 9th webcast of the Morning Dawn Study Group from Padmasambhya Ling. So here we're talking about the 9th chapter of the Venerable Khenpo Rinpoche's book, The Buddhist Path, and the chapter is entitled The Inseparability of Compassion and Emptiness. So we'll begin with the opening prayers, and then we'll go into our discussion. Thanks for joining us.
Yatsem jogi nuluni, pema juni shisudra, kordu kamru mambu ko, jinji jesu naduji, jinji lobje jesu so, guru pema siddhi hum.
Samantabhadra, Vajrasattva, Pramanavajra, Sri Singha, Padmakara, the 25 king and subjects, So, Zor, Nun, Nyam, and the 100 Tirthans and others, Lamas of the Kama internal lineages, to you I pray. The supreme tradition of the glorious Buddha Padmasambhava, which is the essential, extraordinary view and doctrine of the early translation school, you keep alive and spread by the light of wisdom. Lord of Dharma, great Khenpo, I pray at your lotus feet. In the palace of the ultimate Dharmadhatu, the essence of all the Buddhas of the three times, the one who shows clearly the Dharmakaya of my own mind, we pray to the Honorable Root Guru, glorious Root Teacher, precious one, dwelling on the lotus seat on the crown of my head, hold me with your great kindness, and bestow the accomplishments of body, speech, and mind. Om Marapasanadi, Om Marapasanadi, Om Marapasanadi, Om Marapasanadi. So this 9th chapter of the Venerable Khenpo Rinpoche's book, The Buddhist Path, begins on page 45. And I'll quickly give a little overview for this first main topic point of discussion. So here Khenpo Rinpoche's begin the first paragraph saying that compassion is the sincere feeling of wanting to help remove others' suffering when you see them in pain. And that there are three types of compassion. The first is compassion that focuses on sentient beings. The second is compassion that focuses on ignorance. And the third is compassion without any focus at all. And they go on to say that the first type of compassion is when we see others experiencing pain and we want to help them not be in pain. And then the second type of compassion is a compassion that focuses on the root cause of suffering, which is ignorance. We don't see that everything on all levels is constantly changing. And so we hold on to things as if they'll last forever. And we have compassion for everyone who makes this mistake and therefore suffers. And this third type of compassion, compassion without any focus, is all-inclusive compassion that doesn't make any distinctions between objects. It includes them all. So this is the deepest level of compassion in the absolute state of equanimity. By recognizing the absolute true nature, we are free from all the limitations of concepts, judgments, and preferences, and compassion naturally arises beyond all desire and duality. So then we'll go to the first topic point.
This is on page 45, the second and the fourth paragraphs. Compassion can be divided into three types. The first is compassion that focuses on sentient beings. The second is compassion that focuses on ignorance. And the third is compassion without any focus. The first type of compassion is easy to understand. If we look closely at the painful situations that sentient beings experience, we feel compassion and want to change their miserable conditions. The second kind of compassion is directed toward a deeper level. It is compassion for the ignorance that sentient beings have about the true nature of phenomena. Everything about their bodies, possessions, and emotions is constantly changing, but due to ignorance, sentient beings grasp and cling to their lives as if they will last for eons. Then, when things change, they suffer. This type of compassion focuses on ignorance as the root of all suffering. The third type of compassion is objectless compassion. The first two types of compassion have objects. The first has the suffering of sentient beings, and the second has their ignorance. But the third type has no particular focus. It is the deepest level of compassion. It is the meditation on the absolute state of equanimity.
I remember particularly like when first looking at this material, it didn't seem immediately apparent how it was connected. Like on an intellectual level, it's absolutely beautifully laid out in here. And it seemed almost like needing a bit of a jump or something. You know, it didn't quite seem as apparent, like almost like on a personal level at first. You know, it didn't quite have that. Obviously kind of a thing. And so I was curious, particularly when talking, kind of going on these particularly in the different types of compassion and how that relates to the recognition and the understanding of emptiness. Wow, like on a personal, on a practice level, where did people kind of come to find that level of recognition of it, that that familiarity with this inseparability? Or what do you think of it?
Which inseparability?
Well, the inseparability of the compassion and the emptiness. How they are really, they emanate together, co-arise.
So you're asking more about that third type then, or that's the third type of compassion?
Well, I guess the part that particularly when you're looking at those first two levels of compassion, it's hard to think. Okay, I'm not sure how. Because you look at the title of the chapter, Inseparability of Compassion and Emptiness, and you're looking through the first two types of compassion here, and it's not quite sure. It's like how is it that this type of compassion is that inseparable? And then on the third level, it's a little bit easier. When you're resting in the nature of the mind with that recognition, it's easier to see there, but it's still in the first two. So I was curious, particularly for people, how is it that they as they practice or just in their life, where is it they found that kind of familiarity, that understanding where it became a little bit less about the terms and the and more about like, oh yeah, this is true. I feel this, I understand this is natural to me.
I think the first two are easier to understand than the third.
Oh, good.
I agree with the Khenpo's on that.
Yeah, it seems to me in a way like that the first type of compassion is maybe just more, it's like more general, more outer, like you really are seeing someone who's suffering and that feeling of compassion to wish to alleviate that. So it's like more of an outer level, like kind of more gross or apparent situation. And then that second type that's focusing more on the ignorance, I mean, they say this type of compassion is focusing on the root of the suffering. So it's not just the suffering and wanting, like for instance, someone's sick and wanting to like make them feel comfortable, which is good, but like wanting to really get to the root of why are they suffering truly, so then in a way that's a little more, less outer, a little, more inner. Right. And then that third type is like even more, in one way it's saying objectless, it's totally like open and freely expressed and just like no boundaries. So in another way it's almost like it's the most pervasive, it includes the outer and the inner. And so in a way it's almost like, oh, it's more obvious because it's so pervasive. But it's more subtle, it's more maybe the most inner, or innermost.
Most to the source.
Yeah.
Well, I had an answer from my own practice about the thoughts on the three types of compassion. And I started out, and I didn't really connect that much with the Four Noble Truths. They didn't seem very profound to me. And then I started doing a little more astonished at the compassion. But then I started, and that was the first type of compassion. But then I was wondering, so if I'm trying to have compassion, then, or if I think that all beings are suffering and I need to have compassion for them, then what is causing their suffering?
Mm-hmm.
So then it leads into understanding how we see things, and then when we see that, when we really understand what causes the suffering, then we could more easily see that it is not the way that things are, or our perceptions that are causing suffering are not the way things actually are. So then that could lead to emptiness. That was one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's part of what, like Rinpoches say, I think in that next paragraph that, I don't think it was in the, yeah, it's not in the study guide, but it's just right on that next page, page 46. This third type of compassion is achieved gradually, you know, so it's not as easy to understand, so it's just not as apparent, but it's something that we, I think, like you're saying, like as we go along the path, like we kind of get glimpses of it, and it starts to make more sense that it's that way.
And it seems like the bridge is really, in a way, that that second point. Like when I think about it, think about, well, what ignorance? There's ignorance, like here Rinpoches are bringing out how, there's a sense everything's solidly existing and it's going to last forever, and and then when that's just not the nature of it, even on the relative ladder. So there's that kind of disappointment and different kinds of suffering attached with that. But then on the deeper level, so there's ignorance of how things really are on that relative level, or like, that they're not permanent, they're, always changing, and there's nothing substantial defined. And that insubstantial aspect, or ignorance of emptiness, really, is also, they go together. There's that basic misunderstanding of how things are, like on absolute level too. Maybe that's more breaking it into absolute and relative. So as we become more familiar just with how things are, how relatively speaking, absolutely, on absolute level, or whatever, and then of course there's the union, then it seems like that third type of compassion maybe becomes more and more natural, because it seems like this is all so profound. It's so much, really, the whole practice, like the Buddha nature itself, or like the primordial nature, is this compassion without limit and without bound, and it seems like that's a lot of what this third type of compassion is, as we become more and more familiar just with the world and how what's going on, and then as well as is deeper, the essence of all the things of our own mind in the world, then maybe this third compassion becomes more and more natural. And then likewise, like Rinpoche say later in the book, all of this becomes more and more natural, but especially because maybe we ourselves are hopefully, becoming more and more familiar with the nature as it is, and not so shocked.
So if I hear it correctly, just hearing from what everyone's saying here is, even if it's not obvious at first, with that investigation and with that familiarization, it seems like a lot of pretty much what the three of you are saying. With that investigation, you see how it is they really are inseparable.
Yeah, I think one good analogy is like the dream analogy, which is used so often to describe what is enlightenment. It means like awakened one, So awakened from what? We say the slumber of ignorance. That's what a classic metaphor. But if you think of it as not recognizing that, taking everything to be real and true and yourself and everything else, it leads to all kinds of troubles. This we all kind of know. But imagine if we're in the nightmare and then we wake up, totally awake from the nightmare, like the Buddha. And then you look around and you see everyone's sleeping and everyone's having a nightmare. You know? It's like you see there is no real nightmare. But you look around and you see that everyone thinks there is a real nightmare. Which is like, I mean, just on a gross level, you know, having that experience of recognizing, say, the nature is like waking up. And then but yet you see that other people aren't awake, and so there's all this trouble and difficulty. So in that sense, then naturally, I mean, of course, when you see that and you look around, you're like, oh, this isn't a nightmare, this is actually a wonderful dream, you know? But everyone thinks it's a nightmare. Then naturally, you would think, well, there are no real sentient beings, because it's all a dream, but they think that they are real and that it's a nightmare. So that's kind of a little bit of like the emptiness, recognizing the nature, and then recognizing other people who don't recognize in that nature. You know, of course you have compassion, you know, towards that. I like the analogy of a dream because it's so, you know, we can all relate to waking up from a dream and realizing, oh, that was a dream, you know? And then realizing that whatever happened in the dream is like no big deal, you know? What do you think, Khenpo?
I thought, I mean, to put this in a bit of a like larger context of the Buddha's overall teachings, then I was thinking of it kind of in terms of the three turnings of the Wheel of Dharma, the three main topics that the Buddha taught on during his lifetime. And so this first turning of the Wheel of Dharma, the first main topic, is this first two types of compassion are mainly within the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma. So as Ross said, talked about the Four Noble Truths, then this is a principal teaching of the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma. There is suffering, its cause. There's a way out of suffering and the path to that final elimination or cessation of suffering. This first type of compassion is suffering. There is suffering. We obviously see suffering. And then the second type of compassion is, well, what is the cause? What is the cause of that suffering? This is the second noble truth. So this is exceptionally profound. So here, these first two types of compassion and also the first turning of the Wheel of Dharma, the Buddha is principally talking about how is a relative level, or how are the experiences experienced by a mind that's holding onto itself with a lot of grasping. Very mistaken. So that's the whole first turning, is a deluded mind. How does a deluded mind experience relative reality? We see suffering, and then more subtly we have to see its cause. And that's without seeing that, then we'll never achieve enlightenment. Because we all see suffering everywhere. But so, within these three turnings, these first two types of compassion fit within the first turning. And then this second type of compassion, this compassion without any focus or without any limitation, beyond sentient beings and non-sentient beings, beyond this and that. The third type of compassion. This is specifically in the second turning of the Wheel of Dharma. And the main topic of the second turning of the Wheel of Dharma was emptiness, or you could say the absolute nature of experiences. So this is all the words called Prajnaparamita, mother of all the Buddhas, or Madhyamaka, the middle way teachings. So this is going on in addition to how deluded mind experiences relative reality. Then also there's the nature of experiencing that absolute truth, of that same reality. And then here, Rinpoches very quickly then go on to also include the third turning, because in this next page, in page 46, they explain emptiness not as just being empty, like an empty jar, like it's empty of something bad, but it's actually full of all these goodness qualities. So this third turning of the Wheel of Dharma is principally emphasizing this Buddha nature that we all have, all sentient beings. And so very quickly, with these three divisions of compassion, they very succinctly contains all the three turnings of the Wheel of Dharma of Buddha's teachings too. First, how grasping mind experiences reality is being troublesome. Second, what is the cause of that? It's the grasping of the mind. Third, what is the mind like when it's not grasping onto anything? It's full of love and compassion and wisdom. And so I thought, that's what I was thinking. You asked me.
Maybe that kind of leads into the second point.
Yeah.
Kind of talking more about the emptiness.
Yeah. Good, so I'll just give a somewhat quick summary of the rest of this chapter, which is actually 3 more pages of teaching by Rinpoches. So immediately following this first topic point, Rinpoches say that practicing compassion will lead us to realize the absolute truth of emptiness, and recognizing emptiness will spontaneously cause our loving kindness and compassion to grow. And that relative and absolute truth are always naturally inseparable, like fire and its heat. They always arise together. And then in the 7th paragraph, they say emptiness does not mean the absence of something like an empty house or an empty bottle. Emptiness is fullness, openness, and flexibility, because there's nothing that solidly, substantially, permanently exists. Then everything is flexible, dynamic, and interdependent. And this is why all appearances and experiences are said to be like bubbles, reflections, or dreams. In 8th paragraph, if we analyze outer objects, what initially seems solid and unchanging, before we investigate it, is revealed to be made up of many types of parts that are all further divisible into even smaller parts, infinitely. And there is no smallest part, or no irreducible, indivisible material particle or ground of being. That is just a mistaken idea. If we look into the mind, and not just outer objects, we can't find the mind as a solidly existing thing either. Where is the mind exactly? Where is that past thought? Where is that future thought? Where is this present thought right now? On the ultimate level, the mind is also illusory and imaginary. It cannot be found if we look for it. And then the 10th paragraph, understanding the 2 truths, the relative and absolute, is also practically beneficial. Like, for example, Rinpoches give when we get angry. If we look directly at our mind, which feels angry, where is the solid anger? Or the real person that's getting angry? By recognizing the emptiness of the negative emotion, it dissolves. The confusion it is based on is seen, and the negative emotion is released. On the relative level, when we're less angry, then we can apply the antidote of wisdom and love and compassion by seeing that the object of our anger is suffering so much. That person is suffering so much, for example. And that we wish that everyone be freed of their suffering and thus be freed of the negative emotion that's causing that suffering. And even more subtly, that ignorance that causes the negative emotion. And then they go on to say that in the famous Heart Sutra teaching of the Buddha explained the union of appearances and emptiness through the power of his meditation. And this, like, very famous teaching in this from this Heart Sutra we all know is form is emptiness, emptiness is form. Form is none other than emptiness, and emptiness is none other than form. So we might have heard this, but if we really knew it, then this would not be this would be easy for us. This part difficult. So then everything we experience is free from a fixed inherent nature, and yet things still clearly manifest and appear. There's nothing solid to hold on to, which is why things can appear in the first place. So why do we keep grasping onto things as being real and solid and fixed? It's because of our mistaken understanding. We need to release this grasping by realizing the emptiness of all of our experiences. Then the 13th paragraph, they say the great meditation master and scholar Nagarjuna said that on the absolute level everything is emptiness, and yet on the relative level things appear and function. Since all appearances are empty, the relative and absolute are inseparably united, because things appear, and so they're still empty as they appear. What is empty always appears in some way, and all appearances are empty of a singular, independent, permanent nature. Then in meditation practice, wishing that everyone attains enlightenment and become free from suffering, while cultivating more love and compassion, these are the relative level practices. And then meditating on the great emptiness is the absolute practice. And then by realizing the true nature of our mind and our experiences, our compassion and loving kindness spontaneously grows. And then by practicing boundless compassion and love for others, we recognize the emptiness nature of everything more clearly. And then the Rinpoches conclude by saying we should always practice with the understanding that compassion and emptiness are inseparable. So that's the summary of the entire chapter. And then maybe now we'll go, sorry for that long-winded thing, but that's the chapter. And now we'll go to the second topic point, if you would.
Okay. Yeah. So this comes from page 46, the first and second full paragraphs. Practicing compassion will bring about the recognition of emptiness as the true nature of the mind. When you practice virtuous actions of love and compassion on the relative level, you spontaneously realize the profound nature of emptiness, which is the absolute level. In turn, if you focus your meditation practice on emptiness, then your loving kindness and compassion will spontaneously grow. These two natures, the absolute and the relative, are not opposites. They always arise together. They have the same nature. They are inseparable, like a fire and its heat, or the sun and its light. Compassion and emptiness are not like two sides of a coin. Emptiness and compassion are not two separate elements joined together. They are always coexistent. I think that last point is really so good. I mean, I feel like because, we have these two words, emptiness and compassion, I mean, definitely my dualistic mind is like, there are two things, and I like to think of them like coming together like two sides of a coin. And Rinpoches are just so clear in this line. They are not like two sides of a coin. They are totally inseparable. And I mean, these metaphors are great, like fire and heat. You can't take the heat from the fire, like they just arise together. It's really like so profound to contemplate that thing.
I think what always helped me is like, if you think about, well, what is emptiness? Is it a thing? Like this lotus is like a thing that we designate as like a lotus. But is there a lotus here and then there's emptiness here? So there's emptiness and then there's a lotus which is not empty. Emptiness is not something that you can point to as like a designated in space and time. Because the nature of all the objects is empty. That's why if you drop a glass, it shatters, or if it wasn't empty, when you drop it couldn't move. You couldn't drop the glass, it wouldn't shatter. It would be an immutable, completely non-relational glass, suspended, completely separate from everything else. But so it's like, in a certain sense, you could say, compassion and emptiness, of course they're two sides of the same coin. Anything, all relative truth, that's what they're saying. It is emptiness. Mm-hmm. It's not like they're, again, I don't know, that always helped me. There's not emptiness on the left, and then completely solid, substantial book on the right. Because the book's nature is emptiness. Yeah. So otherwise, it would be impossible, I mean, it's something.
And one of the other kind of aspects going off of what you're saying too is the fact, if we're continuing the metaphor of like the glass or something like that, the reason that the glass was even able to exist is emptiness. That it emerged. I mean, of course, we don't exactly consider putting something through a factory emerging, but it depends on your language. So that other aspect of it too, which it does kind of bring this beautiful picture, which I think kind of goes back to that really beautiful metaphor where you're seeing like that quality, the quality of compassion, the quality of emptiness, both in that metaphor of like the fire and the heat. It's just these qualities that are just so beautiful, and that they're even if we can and often do discuss them separately. It's still kind of, the more you investigate them, you start to see, who's making the distinction? Mm-hmm. What is making the distinction?
I think it's kind of nice too, just to like, thinking about this in this first paragraph here, just talking about if you're practicing virtuous actions, this understanding of emptiness will naturally come, and vice versa if you're meditating in emptiness.
And why is that?
I was just going to touch on it just for a minute, just like on a really basic level, like if you just, like maybe just reflect on an experience of compassion that you've had, where you've seen someone and felt compassion, like it, to me that feeling, just the feeling of it is expansive. Like it's this, like it's an experience that opens you beyond yourself.
Yeah.
And so like in that experience is this like at least like a glimpse, or at least like a bit of emptiness, which emptiness being this openness, the flexibility, you know, like what is the nature, that it's not fixed, it's not solid, it's not just like me over here, you know, by myself, and you know, there's this, it's something bigger, and so just kind of the experience touches that, I think.
It seems that way, that when you do religious actions, anyway, one obvious way is your mind is more calm, your mind is more peaceful, you're more joyful, more at ease, more relaxed. So there's not so much junk on the surface, so then naturally you're thinking of other people, I guess, with love and compassion. The junk has like settled, and you know, you're, I don't know.
I mean, if we're talking too about the root of suffering is ignorance, which, what is ignorance, you know, like Rinpoches it's not recognizing that
emptiness nature.
the emptiness nature, that we like, you know, we think that we are these solidly fixed individuals, and there's this outer world that's solid and fixed as well, and you know, so then when compassion is just like a gateway to see a little bit more and more and more as we practice, and you know, practicing these different types of compassion and opening more, bigger, you know, it's just that it isn't so fixed. And then, you know, eventually, hopefully we all realize that it's not fixed at all, you know. It's gonna...
What would it mean to be not fixed at all?
I think just like when they use these words, like in the end of the paragraph here, like it's immeasurable. Like when you talk about like, on a practical level in terms of our own practice, like love and compassion immeasurably, like that's like, so just there is no limit, there's no point at which it stops, or like, you know, there's no like time or space boundary, so it just keeps going.
Yeah, and even just recognizing that, you know, where's the fixation? You know, it's not, because the nature already is, so it's, are we going to recognize it? Are we going to give ourselves the space, you know, do that practice of compassion that actually, you know, pulls you out of a very specific view, you know, a specific way of perceiving, and kind of creating more space around, more openness, you know?
Yeah, less limited.
Yeah.
I think that... Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and along those lines too, that like that final goal, or you know, fully enlightened Buddhahood. That, I mean, the Buddhist teachings, all these beautiful teachings, we've said it before, and Rinpoches have said it. But the Dharma is compassion itself, and that all of the Buddhist teachings are directly talking about that nature. And if all of these beautiful practices aren't disassociated from the nature in any way, like each one of the Buddhist teachings so beautiful and so complete. I'm not saying I like totally understand or anything, but just that aspect how the Buddhist teachings are compassion, and they're all to the point. They're, you know, it's kind of, they're each a way to connect to the nature. So our experience now, no matter how diluted, it's still, there's ways to connect to like the fundamental nature that was never separate, you know, but of course we're not familiar with, we're not natural, and just learning that whole part of the path of becoming more and more familiar, more and more natural, and more expansive or inclusive, or I mean all these different words. It's just a small point, but that part, how even, I guess that's my point, that the Buddhist teachings, they're just in the same way that emptiness and compassion aren't separate. It's never, the path isn't, the path is the path. It's never separate from compassion. It's never separate from, if we're applying it, you know, to the best of our abilities, applying the instructions, thinking about them, contemplating them, doing the practices to the best of our ability, you know, then we're on the path and we're moving more and more toward that. You know, even of course we're all sentient beings and we have limited vision, but still that part of the nature, it's accessible to everyone, even if it is just little glimmers.
it's always
But
there.
there's things in life that are so precious, and that help, to calm, even just on that level of calming our body and speech and mind, and inspiring like some openness and understanding, and it's just it's always moving toward just being more and more fully familiar with the nature as it is. That's my only point. It's never something else. We're not trying to make something up or something that we're not, but just more and more natural. I enjoy it.
I mean, I had different things, but one that was really related to what you're saying is that like fundamental flaw of samsara existence is that we feel like there's this deep gut level fear that if we don't hold on to something, we'll lose out. We'll lose something. It won't work. It'll fall apart. We have to hold and keep going for it to work. We have to hold on. It's that fundamental flaw of samsara. It's actually the cause of samsara is our holding. And when we actually loosen up and get more flexible, what happens is we become more inclusive. Our sphere of being sensitive to others, being sensitive to ourselves, gets more flexible. We become more sensitive. We're not holding so tightly in a specific way. We're functioning in a much more varied, inclusive, complex, fully functional way. And again, just in an experiential level, that's called compassion. We see things more clearly and we relate to them from the heart. So from our head or whatever, we can see more clearly. And from our actual embodied experience, then we feel it as if it's us, as if it's ourselves. Our inclusivity grows, our compassion grows. And why? Because we see more clearly, our wisdom grows. And so there's really said that in the Buddhist teachings, those two, wisdom and compassion, or you could say compassion and emptiness, that these are the two fundamental aspects of all of Buddhist teaching. Wisdom and compassion. And another way to say that is relative truth and absolute truth. These are always together. They're always in union. And this is a fundamental paradox too, really. Because emptiness has two levels of emptiness. This is the second point, but it's separate. Separate but involved. There's emptiness on the relative truth. We think that the thing is fixed. It's set. But it actually isn't set. It's totally dependent on all these things to appear the way it is. So this is called, it's not fixed. It's interdependent or dependently arisen. But that's just a superficial level, because that's still first turning teaching. Because we still think there's a thing there. And that's grasping. Because there's a thing. There's a lotus there, and it has parts, and the parts are real. But so then it goes, Buddha went, oh, so there's actually not a thing there either. It's free from all conceptions, from all designations. And this is second turning teaching. Free from any way of designating it. And that's why, like this paradox you get to in these middle way teachings that Khenpo Rinpoche taught this past summer, and that Khenpo Rinpoche's both taught, and it's in this Madhyamaka book of theirs now, that there are two truths this chapter covers. There can only be two truths. There's not three or more. There's not one or less. It's only two. But if you look at the two truths, this is interesting, something to think about. If you look at the two truths of relative and absolute truth, then they can't be the same. Relative truth can't be the same thing as absolute truth. Because if it was, anything we did on the relative level would lead us to enlightenment. And it doesn't. Because I can harm people, and that doesn't lead me to enlightenment. I can eat an apple, that doesn't mean I'm enlightened. In another way, they can't be different either. Because if relative level didn't lead to enlightenment, if it was totally different, then there'd be no way to ever get enlightened. There'd be no way for enlightened beings to communicate on the relative level. So there's two truths, but they can't be the same, and they can't be different. And there's two. So this is going to the second level of emptiness. Emptiness is beyond conceptions. No conceptual model will actually fully make sense of the nature, the emptiness nature.
It has to be realized, so it has to be practiced. You have to use practice. I mean, there's no, like you can't eat an apple with as much love and compassion and wisdom of eating that apple. I mean, I don't know, maybe.
People do. I mean, some people do. The great Bodhisattvas
I agree with that.
who already have that wisdom.
Yeah.
But then it's a good point to say that too, that we can do it either way, depending on our style. If compassion comes more naturally, that will lead to become more inclusive and to see things more clearly, emptiness nature. If emptiness or the absolute realization comes more easily for different people, then it should open our heart. And if the one doesn't lead to the other, then something's off in the practice. And that's the path, because something's constantly off. Otherwise we'd be on all the time, we'd be Buddhists. But so, it's beautiful that it works either way. Nature's so accommodating.
and that works with individual people's own personality types too. Like some people talk about like, oh, I'm gonna dance my way to enlightenment, or I'm gonna interact with people and do all these things, embodiment, eminence, love people, and they really emphasize that, that aspect. And other people, I'm gonna sit still and not move for months, like in a cave. And those are, not that they're totally different, but it's just, doesn't mean that both can reach to the same goal, that, one might be more transcendent oriented, but then the other one is more eminent, embodied, and then ultimately they're inseparable, you have that realization, but you're still embodied, you don't vanish into nothingness space. So there's something for everyone.
Anything more?
The end is the beginning.
We'll just dedicate them.
Swasti Vidyayantu Chosun Dasun Jidu Bemajun Inge Sode Duje Dujinji Kinchen Balin Chera Jubeku Nyojo Dendro Zezanda Jinjo Om Swasti Choku Nanda Lunku Chenrezi Choku Bajun Yadun Dujedu Bila Bazan Jojo Yonsinga Tendor Bende Damdu Nyo Charsho Kanjri Gawe Kowe Shinkansu Eran Dewa Malu Jueni Chenrezi Wan Tenzin Jamso Yi Jabe Kaje Badu Tenjoji Om Swasti Sewan Rizin Bemejin Lachi Doni Gurbe Lasan Ordena Shedru Golo Sumji Bajote Sanchen Nadam Jole Nam Jasho. By this merit may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara may I free all beings. The precious bodhicitta, and those without it may it be generated, and those who have it may it never diminish, but always continue increasing.